Eleanor Mitchell carefully folded the last blue polo shirt, smoothing the edges with the precision of someone who had spent 30 years caring for impeccable hospital uniforms. Her son's laundry basket was finally empty, once again. At 62 years old, she had developed a routine that worked like Swiss clockwork. Every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, Marcus's silver Honda Civic would park in her driveway. He'd enter through the back door, greet her with a hurried, "Hi, Mom," dump 2 bags of dirty clothes in the laundry room, and head straight for the refrigerator. "Got coffee?" he'd ask, already knowing the answer. Eleanor always had coffee, just as she always had time to wash, dry, iron, and fold his clothes, just as she always had a warm lunch waiting for him before he left, carrying bags now filled with clean, fragrant clothes. That October morning, while organizing piles of clothes by category, work dress shirts, gym clothes, casual jeans, Eleanor wondered when exactly this had become her responsibility. Marcus was 28 years old, had a stable job at a tech company, and owned his own apartment downtown. Yet every Saturday, there he was, like a teenager bringing his dirty laundry home. "Mom, did you save some of that lavender-scented detergent?" Marcus called from the kitchen, his voice muffled by the open refrigerator door. "Top shelf, honey," Eleanor replied automatically, her hands still working on the perfect folds of a white shirt. She didn't know when she had stopped questioning this dynamic. Maybe it had started right after Marcus moved out 3 years ago. It was a way to keep in touch, she had rationalized. An excuse to see him every week, to make sure he was eating well, to keep alive that thread that connects mothers and sons, even when they create their own lives. But lately, especially in recent weeks, something had started to bother her. It wasn't the work itself. Eleanor had always found satisfaction in taking care of things, in creating order from chaos. It was more subtle than that. It was the way Marcus arrived in a hurry, how he barely looked at her while she worked, how he assumed she would always be available, always willing, always there. "Lunch is almost ready," she announced, carrying the basket of clean clothes to the living room. "I made that stroganoff you like." Marcus was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone with an expression of concentrated boredom. He lifted his eyes just enough to nod before returning his attention to the screen. Eleanor set the basket on the floor and began separating clothes into distinct bags. There was something hypnotic about that movement. Pick up, fold, organize, repeat. It was almost meditative, if not for the growing sensation that she was becoming invisible in her own house. "Mom, are you sure you used fabric softener? This shirt feels kind of rough," Marcus commented, handling one of the piles without lifting his eyes from the phone. "I did, honey. Maybe it's the fabric. You know how these synthetic shirts get after a few washes?" He murmured, clearly not paying attention to the answer. Eleanor finished organizing the clothes and headed to the kitchen to finalize lunch. While stirring the stroganoff, her reflection in the kitchen window caught her attention. Graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, hands still skilled and steady, upright posture maintained by years of hospital shifts. She still recognized herself there, but there was something different, an expression she couldn't identify. "It's ready," she called, serving 2 generous plates. Marcus appeared in the kitchen with the economical movement of someone executing a well-established routine. They ate in silence, punctuated only by the sounds of forks against plates and his occasional comments about work or some series he was watching. "Jennifer told me her mom now works part-time at a flower shop," Marcus commented casually between bites. "Old lady stuff, right? Messing with flowers all day." Eleanor stopped eating for a moment, her fork suspended in the air. "Working with flowers can be very relaxing and useful." "Oh yeah, sure. But why work when you don't need to, right? Isn't retirement supposed to be about resting?" She didn't respond immediately. Technically, Marcus was right. Her retirement as a nurse was comfortable, and she didn't need to work out of financial necessity. But there was something in the way he said resting that sounded almost like doing nothing important. "Some people like to stay active," she said finally. "Yeah, maybe. But at least you don't have to worry about that, right? You already have enough to do here at home." Eleanor felt a strange pang in her chest, but couldn't identify exactly what it was. Irritation? Sadness? Or maybe it was just the first spark of something she wasn't ready to name yet. After lunch, Marcus loaded his bags of clean clothes into the car with the efficiency of someone who executed the same task every week. Eleanor accompanied him to the door, as she always did. "Thanks for lunch, Mom. And for the clothes. You're the best." He kissed her quickly on the cheek, an automatic and affectionate gesture, but also hurried. "You're welcome, honey. Drive carefully." Eleanor stood at the door, watching the car disappear around the street corner. The house fell silent again, and she found herself alone with the dirty dishes, the washing machine that needed to be cleaned, and a growing sense that something was out of place. While washing dishes, her hands moving automatically through the familiar routine, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's comment about having enough to do at home. What exactly did she do during the week? She kept the house clean, but for whom if she lived alone? She cooked, but only for herself, except on Saturdays. She watched her shows, read her books, tended to the small garden in the backyard. There had been a time when her life had been different. 12-hour shifts at the hospital, decisions that saved lives, colleagues who depended on her experience and competence. There was purpose in each day, urgency in each decision, the deep satisfaction of knowing that her presence made a difference in the world. Now she washed clothes on Saturdays and waited for the week to pass until the next Saturday arrived. But this feeling of emptiness, Eleanor realized while drying the last cup, hadn't started with retirement. It had begun gradually, so subtly that she had barely noticed. With small comments, small assumptions, small ways of being seen not as Eleanor Mitchell, specialized nurse, competent woman, person with her own dreams and aspirations, but simply as Mom, as if that were her only identity that mattered. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her friend Helen, as she always did on Saturday afternoons. "How was the weekly laundry ritual?" Helen asked, and Eleanor could hear the ironic smile in her friend's voice. "As always," Eleanor replied, trying to keep her tone light. "Marcus came, ate, got his clothes, and left. And you? How do you feel about it?" It was a simple question, but one Eleanor hadn't asked herself in a long time. How did she feel? "Fine, I think. It's good to see him every week." "Eleanor," Helen said gently, "you didn't answer my question." Eleanor was silent for a moment, looking through the kitchen window at the garden she had cultivated with such care. The roses were still blooming, despite the approaching autumn. There was something about the persistence of those flowers that touched her in an unexpected way. "I don't know, Helen. I honestly don't know." And that, Eleanor realized while hanging up the phone a few minutes later, was the first time in a long time that she had been completely honest about her own feelings. The week passed like a slow-motion movie. Eleanor found herself paying attention to details that would normally go unnoticed. How she spent mornings organizing things that were already organized. How afternoons stretched empty between lunch and dinner. How nights filled with television programs she watched without really seeing. On Thursday, while watering her roses, she stopped to really observe them. There was something about the care they required. Attention to detail, specialized knowledge about when to prune, when to fertilize, how to identify and treat diseases that awakened a dormant memory. It was similar to the care she had offered her patients for 3 decades, precise, informed, done with purpose. On Friday, she cleaned the house with an almost frantic intensity, as if she could find meaning in the perfection of each polished surface. But when she finished, she stood in the middle of the immaculate living room, feeling strangely like an actress on an empty stage, with no audience for her performance. And then Saturday arrived. Marcus arrived punctually at 9 a.m., as always. The same Honda Civic, the same 2 bags of clothes, the same hurried greeting. But this time, Eleanor was waiting for him with different attention, observing the interaction as if it were the first time. "Hi, Mom," he said, depositing the bags in the laundry room without really looking at her. "Good morning, honey. How was your week?" "Oh, busy. You know how it is. Got coffee?" Eleanor served the coffee and watched Marcus settle in the kitchen with his phone, sliding his finger across the screen while drinking. She had started washing the clothes when he appeared in the laundry room. "Mom, can you give special attention to that navy blue shirt? I have an important presentation on Monday." "Of course, honey," she replied automatically. But something in the way he made the request, not asking if she could, but assuming she would, awakened that strange feeling in her chest again. Lunch proceeded as always. Stroganoff, superficial conversation about his work, silences filled by the sound of chewing. Eleanor found herself observing her son as if trying to decipher him. When had he become this person who took her availability for granted? Or had he always been like this, and she was the one who had changed? It was when Marcus was loading the bags into the car that the question that would change everything was asked. "Oh, Mom," he said, pausing at the door. "Next week, I'll have to bring the clothes Friday night instead of Saturday morning. I have a commitment on Saturday." Eleanor felt a pang of irritation. "Marcus, Friday night is a bit complicated for me. I have my shows." He laughed, a sound that could have been affectionate if it hadn't been so dismissive. "Shows? What shows? Mom, you're retired. It's not like you have anything important to do." And then came the question that would echo in Eleanor's mind for the next few days, the question that would make her question not just her routine, but her very identity. "What else do you have to do all day?" Marcus said this casually, almost distractedly, while adjusting the bags in the car's back seat. It wasn't said with cruelty, but with an assumption so natural, so unquestionable, that that's what hurt the most. Eleanor stood at the door, watching the car drive away, the question reverberating in her mind like an echo in an empty cave. "What else do you have to do all day?" She closed the door and leaned against it, closing her eyes. The house was silent, as it always was after Marcus left, but this time the silence seemed to amplify the question. What did she have to do all day? Eleanor walked slowly to the living room and sat in her favorite armchair, the same one where she spent most afternoons. She looked around the space, every piece of furniture in the right place, every surface clean, every cushion perfectly arranged. It was a beautiful house, comfortable, but also empty. She thought about her life before retirement. Mornings started at 6 a.m. with the alarm, followed by quick coffee and rushing to the hospital. The shifts were intense. Patients who depended on her knowledge, colleagues who respected her experience, moments where her presence meant the difference between life and death. There was stress, of course, but there was also purpose. There were people who saw her as Eleanor, the competent nurse, not just as someone who was there to serve. When was the last time someone had asked for her professional opinion about something important? When was the last time she had felt truly useful, not just convenient? Marcus's question hadn't just been about free time. It had been about value, about purpose, about whether her life had meaning beyond being available for others' needs. Eleanor got up and went to the kitchen, where there were still some lunch dishes to wash. But this time, while her hands worked automatically, her mind was elsewhere. She thought about Helen, who had started working part-time at a bookstore after retirement, and spoke enthusiastically about young customers who asked for book recommendations. She thought about her neighbor, Margaret, who had become a volunteer at an animal shelter and was always telling stories about the dogs she helped find homes. She thought about her former hospital colleague, Ruth, who now taught knitting classes for seniors at a community center. All these women had found ways to continue contributing, to continue being seen as people with valuable knowledge and skills. They weren't just waiting for life to happen around them. But Eleanor? What was she doing besides washing clothes on Saturdays and keeping an empty house impeccably clean? That night, she went to bed earlier than usual, but sleep didn't come easily. Marcus's question continued echoing, but now it was being accompanied by other questions she had avoided asking herself for too long. When had she stopped seeing herself as a person with her own potential? When had she accepted that her role in life was simply to be available for others' needs? And more importantly, what could she do to change that? Eleanor got up and went to her bedroom window, looking at the silent street bathed in streetlight. There was something about the night's quietude that made her think more clearly. Maybe Marcus was right about her not having anything important to do, but maybe that was a problem she could solve. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt a spark of something she had almost forgotten how to identify: determination. Marcus's question had been an awakening, not an insult, although it had hurt, but a mirror that had reflected a truth she had avoided facing. She had become exactly what he saw: someone without her own purpose, without her own agenda, without her own life. But she didn't need to continue being that person. Eleanor returned to bed with her mind more active than it had been in years. For the first time since retirement, she had a project: discover who she could become when she stopped being just what others expected her to be. And maybe, just maybe, the next time Marcus asked what she had to do all day, she would have an answer that would surprise him. Eleanor woke up Sunday morning with a mental clarity she hadn't experienced in months. Marcus's question still reverberated, but now with a different tone, no longer as a wound, but as a challenge. She made her morning coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad she had found in a drawer. At the top of the first page, she wrote, "Who is Eleanor Mitchell?" It seemed like a silly question at first, but as she began to write, she realized it was more complex than she had imagined. Eleanor Mitchell, 62 years old, former ICU specialized nurse, mother of Marcus, 28 years old, widow for 8 years, retired for 2 years. She stopped and looked at what she had written. It was a factual description, but strangely incomplete. These were just labels: former something, mother of someone, widow of someone. Where was she herself in this description? She tried again. Eleanor Mitchell enjoys gardening, reads at least 2 books per month, makes exceptional homemade bread, has deep knowledge about medical care that could save lives, knows how to manage crises under pressure, has skilled hands and a sharp mind that hasn't been adequately challenged in the last 2 years. Better. Much better. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Helen. "How are you, dear? You seemed a bit strange yesterday when we talked." Eleanor hesitated. She could give the automatic answer, "I'm fine, thank you." Or she could be honest. For the first time in a long time, she chose honesty. "Helen, can I ask you something? When you started working at the bookstore, how did you feel?" "Oh," Helen laughed. "You mean besides terrified? It was liberating, dear. For the first time in years, I was Helen who knows about books, not just Helen the retiree or Helen whose daughter lives in another state." "Why do you ask?" Eleanor told her about Marcus's question, about how she had spent the night thinking about purpose and identity. "Eleanor," Helen said gently, "you know you're only 62, right? You could have an entire second career ahead of you if you wanted. But doing what? I'm a retired nurse. I can't just go back to working in a hospital." "Dear, you're thinking too narrowly. You have 3 decades of experience caring for people, medical knowledge, ability to work under pressure. Do you think those talents only work inside a hospital?" After they hung up, Eleanor kept thinking about the conversation. Helen was right. She was thinking too restrictively about her options. On Monday, she did something she hadn't done in months, dressed as if she had an important place to go. Navy blue blouse, dress pants, a touch of lipstick. Not because someone would see her, but because she wanted to feel competent again. She drove to downtown and walked the streets like an explorer in unknown territory. So much had changed since she had stopped coming regularly. New stores, new restaurants, an energy she had forgotten existed. That's when she saw the sign in the window of a small medical clinic, seeking part-time nurse for home care. Experience required, flexible hours. Eleanor stopped and read the ad again. Home care. She could use all her experience, but in a less intense environment than a hospital. Flexible hours meant she could maintain some control over her schedule. For the first time in 2 years, she felt that familiar acceleration in her chest that came when an interesting opportunity presented itself. She wrote down the phone number and continued walking, but now with a more determined step. There were other possibilities, too. She saw ads for first aid instructors, health consultants, even positions at spas looking for people with medical backgrounds. When she got home, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with a new list. Options for the new Eleanor. As she wrote, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Excitement. Not the passive excitement of waiting for something good to happen, but the active excitement of creating possibilities. On Tuesday, she called the clinic. "Hello, I'm calling about the home care nurse position." "Oh, great. Do you have experience in the field?" Eleanor almost laughed. 30 years in ICU. "Perfect. Can you come in for an interview tomorrow?" Eleanor scheduled the interview for Wednesday at 2 p.m. After hanging up, she looked at herself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back seemed different, more alert, more focused. She spent the rest of Tuesday preparing for the interview like she hadn't prepared for anything in years. She reviewed her medical knowledge, practiced how she would explain her experience, even chose her outfit carefully. Wednesday morning, while getting ready, Eleanor thought about Marcus. What would he say if he knew she was considering going back to work? Part of her worried about his reaction and how it would affect Saturday laundry days. But a bigger part of her, a part that was growing every day, didn't care what Marcus would think. This decision was about her, about who she wanted to be, about how she wanted to spend her days. The interview was at Dr. Santos's clinic, a small but well-established family practice. Dr. Santos was a man in his 50s with graying hair and a warm smile. "Mrs. Mitchell, it's a pleasure to meet you. 30 years in ICU is impressive. What made you consider home care?" Eleanor had thought about this question. "During my years at the hospital, I realized that patient recovery often depended as much on environment as on medical treatment. Home care allows patients to recover in a familiar environment with personalized attention. It's a more holistic approach." It was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The complete truth was that she needed to feel useful again, needed to use her skills, needed to have a purpose that was hers. Our patients are mainly elderly people who need post-surgical care, medication management, basic physical therapy. Nothing too complicated for someone with your experience. The schedule is flexible. You could work 2 or 3 days a week depending on demand. "That would be perfect," Eleanor said, and realized it was true. "There's just one thing, Dr. Santos continued. "Many of our patients are, how can I put it, a bit suspicious about changes. They get used to their routines and may resist new caregivers. Do you feel comfortable dealing with difficult personalities?" Eleanor thought about all the complicated patients she had managed over the years, all the stressed families, all the crisis moments where she had maintained calm and found solutions. "Dr. Santos, I spent 3 decades caring for people in their worst moments. Difficult personalities are a specialty of mine." He laughed. "Then you're hired. Can you start Monday?" Eleanor drove home in a state of euphoria she hadn't felt in years. She had a job, not just a job, an opportunity to use her skills, to make a difference in people's lives, to be Eleanor the competent nurse again. When she got home, she allowed herself a moment of pure happiness, dancing alone in the living room to music only she could hear. But then, reality landed. Saturday was coming. And for the first time in 3 years, Eleanor would have something to do besides washing clothes and waiting. She smiled to herself. Marcus had asked what else she had to do all day. Soon, he would find out. Eleanor's first Monday as a home care nurse began at 7 a.m. with a call from Dr. Santos. "Eleanor, we have a situation. Our regular patient, Mrs. Carmen Valdez, is recovering from hip surgery and needs someone today. She's, let's say, a lady with very strong opinions. Do you feel ready?" "Completely ready," Eleanor replied, and realized she really felt that way. She dressed in her uniform, not the same type she wore at the hospital, but professional and comfortable clothes that made her feel competent. She grabbed her medical bag, which she had organized carefully on Sunday, and drove to the provided address. Carmen Valdez lived in a cozy house in a middle-class neighborhood. She was a 78-year-old woman with perfectly styled white hair and dark eyes that missed little. "You're the new nurse?" she asked, evaluating Eleanor from head to toe. "You look very young. How old are you?" 62, Mrs. Valdez, and 30 years of nursing experience." The other nurse was 68. "I liked her. She understood what it's like to have a body that doesn't cooperate anymore." Eleanor smiled. "Mrs. Valdez, I can assure you that my body has already given me some lessons about not cooperating, and I hope I can take care of you as well as your previous nurse." Carmen studied her for another moment, then nodded. "Let's see. Do you know how to help someone get out of bed without causing pain?" For the next 3 hours, Eleanor worked with Carmen, helping her with physical therapy exercises, organizing medications, preparing nutritious meals, and more importantly, simply talking. Carmen, Eleanor discovered, was a former history teacher who had spent 40 years educating teenagers. She had fascinating stories and a mind sharp as a razor. "You're good at this," Carmen said, when Eleanor was preparing to leave. "Different from the previous nurse, but good. You actually listen when people talk." "Thank you, Mrs. Valdez. I'll be back Wednesday." "Carmen, if you're going to take care of me, you can call me Carmen." Eleanor drove home with a smile she couldn't contain. It had been just one morning, but she felt more alive than she had felt in months. The week passed quickly. On Wednesday, she returned to Carmen, who received her with Cuban coffee and more stories. On Friday, she was introduced to a new patient, Mr. George Thompson, an 82-year-old war veteran recovering from pneumonia. George was more reserved than Carmen, but Eleanor noticed he responded well to a direct, no-nonsense approach. She treated him with the same professionalism and respect she had offered all her patients over the years, and gradually he began to open up. "Have you ever cared for soldiers before?" he asked on Friday. "Not soldiers specifically, but I've cared for many people who fought their own battles. Every patient is a fighter in their own way." George nodded, clearly satisfied with the answer. When Saturday arrived, Eleanor woke up with a different energy. She would still prepare lunch for Marcus, still wash his clothes, but now these activities were inserted into a life that had other purposes too. Marcus arrived punctually at 9 a.m. as always. "Hi, Mom," he said, depositing the usual bags. "You look different today. Did you do something to your hair?" Eleanor smiled. "Not, honey. Just a good week." "Oh, that's good. What did you do that was special?" For a moment, Eleanor considered telling him about the job, but something made her hesitate. Maybe it was because she wanted to see how things developed first. Maybe it was because she wanted to enjoy this new part of her life without having to explain or justify it yet. "Oh, you know, the usual. Kept myself busy." Marcus nodded, already scrolling through his phone. "Cool. Hey, can you give special attention to that blue shirt again? It really looked great after you worked on it last week." "Of course, honey." As the morning progressed, Eleanor found herself observing the interaction with new eyes. Marcus was comfortable, relaxed, assuming everything would be exactly as it always had been. He didn't really look at her, not like Carmen looked at her when she asked about her day, or like George looked at her when she was checking his blood pressure. During lunch, Marcus told her about work, about a new project, about some girl he was casually dating. He was animated when he talked about these things, engaged and interesting. But when the conversation turned to her, or when she tried to share something, his attention drifted. "Mom, do you have those little crackers that I like? The ones with garlic?" Eleanor was in the middle of telling him about a book she had read when he interrupted. She paused, got the crackers, and didn't finish the story. After he left, Eleanor sat in her kitchen, thinking about the contrast. With Carmen and George, she was Eleanor the professional, Eleanor with knowledge and skills. With Marcus, she was just Mom, a background figure whose primary purpose was to be available. But for the first time, instead of feeling sad about this, she felt protective. Protective of this new part of her life that was giving her purpose and joy. Marcus didn't need to know about this yet. This new version of Eleanor belonged to her, and she wasn't ready to share it. Eleanor spent the rest of Saturday afternoon gardening, but her mind was already planning Monday. Dr. Santos had mentioned that there were more patients who needed care, possibly a regular schedule if things worked out well. For the first time in years, Eleanor was looking forward to Monday morning, and if Marcus asked again what she had to do all day, she would have an answer. She just wasn't sure she was ready to give it to him yet. 2 weeks had passed since Eleanor had started working, and the transformation was remarkable. Not just in how she felt, more energized, more purposeful, more herself, but in how others saw her. Carmen now awaited her with genuine enthusiasm, having prepared Cuban coffee and always a new story to share. George had begun specifically requesting Eleanor for his appointments, something Dr. Santos mentioned was unusual for him. "You have a gift," Dr. Santos told Eleanor on a Friday afternoon. "My patients usually take months to warm up to new caregivers. You managed it in days." Eleanor knew it wasn't magic. It was simply the result of 30 years treating people with dignity and respect, listening to them as individuals rather than just medical cases. But hearing this acknowledgement felt wonderful after years of feeling invisible. The most important change, though, was internal. Eleanor had begun each day with a sense of purpose. She had appointments to keep, people counting on her, professional responsibilities that required her expertise. She was Eleanor Mitchell, RN, again, not just somebody's mother waiting for Saturday laundry duty. But there was a cloud on the horizon. Saturday was approaching, and for the first time since she started working, there would be a conflict. Dr. Santos had called Thursday evening. Eleanor, I know you don't usually work weekends, but we have an emergency situation. Mr. Martinez is being released from the hospital Saturday morning after heart surgery, and we need someone to stay with him for a few hours while his daughter drives in from Phoenix. Would it be possible? Eleanor didn't hesitate. Of course. What time do you need me there? 9 a.m. through about 2 p.m. I'm very grateful, Eleanor. Only after she hung up did Eleanor realize Marcus would be arriving Saturday at 9 a.m. for his usual routine. For a moment, she felt the familiar tug of putting Marcus's needs first. She could call Dr. Santos back, explain that she had a family commitment, ask if another nurse could cover. But then she paused. Why should her son's convenience take precedence over a patient who actually needed medical care? Marcus was a healthy 28-year-old man who was perfectly capable of doing his own laundry. Mr. Martinez was a 73-year-old man recovering from heart surgery. The choice wasn't difficult. Friday evening, Eleanor called Marcus. Hi, honey. I need to let you know that tomorrow I won't be available at your usual time. What do you mean, not available? It's Saturday, Mom. We always do this on Saturday. I know, but I have a commitment that I can't reschedule. What kind of commitment? What could be more important than our routine? Eleanor paused. There it was. The assumption that nothing in her life could be important enough to disrupt his convenience. Marcus, I'll be working. Silence. Working? What do you mean working? You're retired. I started a part-time job 2 weeks ago. Usually doesn't conflict with Saturdays, but tomorrow is an emergency situation. A job? His voice was incredulous. What kind of job? Why didn't you tell me? I'm working as a home healthcare nurse, and I didn't tell you because it's my decision to make. Mom, this is crazy. You don't need to work. Your retirement is comfortable. Why would you want to deal with all that stress again? Eleanor felt something shift inside her, a familiar patience wearing thin. Marcus, it's not about money. It's about having a purpose, feeling useful, using my skills to help people who need it. But what about your family responsibilities? What about helping me? I depend on you for these things. There it was, the real issue. Not concern for her well-being, but inconvenience to his routine. Marcus, you are a capable adult man with your own apartment and a good job. Doing your laundry is not a medical emergency. I can't believe you're choosing strangers over your own son. The comment stung because it was so fundamentally unfair. She wasn't choosing strangers over him. She was choosing a meaningful life over being taken for granted. I'm not choosing strangers over you, Marcus. I'm choosing to have a life that doesn't revolve entirely around your convenience. Tomorrow, I'll be caring for a man who just had heart surgery and needs professional medical attention. You need to wash some clothes. I think you can figure out which is more urgent. So, what am I supposed to do about my laundry? Eleanor took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been dreading, but also the moment that was necessary. The same thing that millions of other adults do, Marcus. Take it to a laundromat, or buy a washing machine for your apartment, or learn to manage your time better so you don't have 2 weeks' worth of dirty clothes. But I like the way you do it. You're good at it. I'm also good at taking care of people who actually need medical attention. As I said, tomorrow I have a patient who just had heart surgery. Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had an edge she hadn't heard before. I don't understand where this is coming from, Mom. You used to care about family. That pushed Eleanor over an edge she didn't even know existed. I still care about family, Marcus. But caring about family doesn't mean having no life, no purpose, no identity beyond being available for your convenience. For 3 years, I've washed your clothes every Saturday. For 3 years, you've shown up, eaten my food, used my time, and barely looked at me as a person. You want to know where this is coming from? It's coming from the realization that I am more than just your personal laundry service. Another silence. I didn't know you felt that way. Because you never asked. You never asked how I felt about anything. You just assumed that because I'm retired, and because I'm your mother, that I exist to make your life easier. Eleanor could hear him processing this, and part of her felt bad for the sharpness in her voice. But another part, a part that had been quiet for too long, felt relieved to finally say it. Look, Marcus, she continued, her voice gentler but still firm. I love you, and I always will. But I also need to live my own life. This job, It makes me feel useful again. It reminds me that I have skills and knowledge that can help people. I'm not ready to give that up because it's inconvenient for your laundry schedule. Okay, he said finally. Okay. I guess I never thought about it that way. So tomorrow, you'll need to figure out another solution for your clothes. Yeah, I'll figure it out. After they hung up, Eleanor sat in her kitchen, her heart racing. She had never spoken to her son that way before, had never challenged his assumptions so directly. It felt scary and liberating at the same time. She had no idea how he would react, whether he would be angry or hurt or simply confused. But for the first time in years, she had stood up for herself, had prioritized her own needs and commitments. Tomorrow, she would care for Mr. Martinez through his first day recovering from heart surgery, and Marcus would learn to take care of his own laundry. It was, Eleanor thought with satisfaction, exactly as it should be. Saturday dawned clear and cold, and Eleanor woke up with a mixture of nervousness and determination. She dressed carefully, professional but comfortable clothes, shoes suitable for a long day of medical care. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't preparing to wash clothes. Before leaving, she checked her medical bag one more time. Stethoscope, thermometer, basic emergency medications, gloves, Mr. Martinez's medical documentation. Everything in order, as she had learned to do during decades of hospital work. At 8:45 a.m., Eleanor arrived at Mr. E. Martinez's house, a modest but well-kept residence in a family neighborhood. His daughter, Maria, was waiting at the door with a worried expression. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Maria. Thank you for coming, especially on a Saturday. I know it must be inconvenient." "It's no inconvenience at all," Eleanor said firmly. "Caring for post-surgical patients is exactly what I should be doing." Maria led her to the room where Mr. Martinez was lying, clearly uncomfortable but alert. He was a 73-year-old man with graying hair and worker's hands, the type of person Eleanor had cared for hundreds of times throughout her career. "Dad, this is Nurse Eleanor. She's going to stay with you while I go get the medicine and groceries." Mr. Martinez studied her with cautious eyes. "You look young to be a nurse." Eleanor smiled. "I'm 62 years old with 30 years of experience. Believe me, I've seen everything." "Have you ever cared for people after heart surgery?" "Many times. I worked in ICU for 3 decades. Cardiac surgery was our specialty." Something in Eleanor's confident tone seemed to reassure both Mr. Martinez and his daughter. Maria said goodbye with instructions about medications and emergency numbers, promising to return by 2 p.m. The first hours were dedicated to basic medical work, checking vital signs, helping with medications, monitoring the surgical incision, guiding simple breathing exercises. It was work Eleanor could do in her sleep, but that she had missed profoundly. "You're good at this," Mr. Martinez commented, after she had helped him get out of bed and walked to a comfortable chair in the living room. "You don't treat me like I'm going to break." "You're not going to break. You had heart surgery, you didn't lose the ability to be an independent person. My job is to help you recover, not replace your autonomy." The last nurse I had talked to me like I was a child. Eleanor understood. Some people confuse medical care with condescension. It's not the same thing. As the morning progressed, Mr. Martinez began sharing stories of his life. 40 years as a mechanic, 3 children, 8 grandchildren, a wife he had lost 2 years before. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was really paying attention. "You know," he said around 11 a.m., "it's been a long time since someone talked to me like what I have to say is interesting." "It is interesting," Eleanor replied. 40 years as a mechanic? You must have fixed thousands of cars, solved thousands of problems. That's a lifetime of specialized knowledge." It was true, but it was also something more. Eleanor was recognizing in him the same thing she had begun to recognize in herself, the need to be seen as a person with value, with experience, with important contributions to make. Around noon, her phone rang. It was Marcus. "Mom, can you talk?" Eleanor looked at Mr. Martinez, who was resting comfortably in the chair, and stepped into the other room. "I can't talk long, Marcus. I'm with a patient." I know. It's just that, well, I went to a laundromat this morning." "Oh, and how was it?" "It was enlightening." Eleanor waited. "First, I didn't know how to separate colors from whites properly. I ended up dyeing 2 dress shirts light pink because I put a red sock in with them. Despite the situation, Eleanor had to suppress a laugh. Then I didn't know what temperature to use for different fabrics. And the dryer. Mom, I shrank a sweater that cost $100. Oh, Marcus. And the whole thing took 3 hours. 3 hours! I was just sitting there, waiting for the machines to finish, and I kept thinking, you do this for me every week, plus separating, folding, and organizing everything perfectly. And I don't even thank you properly. Eleanor felt something soften in her chest. Marcus. No, let me finish. I was sitting in that laundromat, looking at all those people doing their own clothes, and I realized something. I'm the only adult I know who still takes his dirty laundry to his mom every weekend. That's kind of pathetic, isn't it? It's not pathetic, honey. It is, Mom. It's pathetic. And more than that, it's disrespectful. You spent 30 years saving lives, and I treat you like you're my personal maid. Eleanor was silent, not wanting to interrupt what was clearly a moment of epiphany for her son. When you said yesterday that I never ask how you feel, you were right. I don't ask. I just assume you'll be there, available, always happy to do things for me. But last night I kept thinking, when was the last time I asked about your dreams? About what makes you happy? About what you want to do with your life? Marcus. And the answer is never, Mom. I never ask those things because, selfishly, I didn't want to know the answers if they meant changes to my convenience. Eleanor felt tears threatening, not tears of sadness, but of relief. Her son was finally seeing her as a person. So I want to ask now, how do you feel about your new job? Eleanor looked through the door to where Mr. Martinez was resting, thought about Carmen anxiously awaiting her visits, about George specifically asking for her. I feel alive again, Marcus, useful, like I have purpose, that I'm happy for you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to realize what I was doing. Thank you, honey. That means everything to me. And Mom? About Saturdays? What do you think about? Instead of me bringing my laundry, I come and cook lunch for you. For a change? I may not be as good as you, but I can try. Eleanor smiled, feeling something fundamental reorganize between them. I would love that, Marcus. After they hung up, Eleanor returned to Mr. Martinez, who looked at her with curiosity. Good news? The best, she replied. My son just grew up a little bit. Sometimes it takes time, Mr. Martinez said wisely. But when it happens, it's worth the wait. Maria arrived at 2 p.m. sharp, finding her father visibly more comfortable and animated than when she had left. She's good, Mr. Martinez told his daughter, indicating Eleanor. Professional, but also human. You should ask for her to be my regular nurse. Driving home, Eleanor reflected on the morning. She had helped a man recover from serious surgery, had been appreciated for her professional competence, and had witnessed a genuine transformation in her relationship with her son. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt completely satisfied with her choices. And best of all, she could hardly wait for Monday to get back to work. The following weeks established a new rhythm in Eleanor's life, a rhythm she embraced with growing enthusiasm. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday were work days, caring for a growing list of patients who specifically requested her services. Tuesday and Thursday were for personal tasks, gardening, and, for the first time in years, genuine time for herself. And Saturdays. Saturdays had become something completely different. Marcus arrived the first Saturday after the laundry revolution with a shopping bag instead of bags of dirty clothes. I hope you're hungry, he said, looking slightly nervous. I brought ingredients to make chicken parmigiana. It might not turn out as good as yours, but I'm sure it will be delicious, Eleanor said, and realized she was genuinely touched by the effort. Cooking together revealed a side of Marcus she hadn't seen in years. He asked questions about seasonings, paid attention to techniques, really engaged in the process. And more importantly, he asked questions about her life. How's it been going back to work? Is it very different from the hospital? Very different, Eleanor said, watching him cut onions with inexperienced care. In the hospital, you care for people in crisis. At home, you care for people recovering. It's more hopeful. Do you miss the hospital? It was a question she didn't expect, but one she had thought about. I miss the intensity sometimes. the feeling that every decision could save a life. But I don't miss the stress, the 12-hour shifts, the hospital politics. Now I have time to really get to know my patients, to hear their stories. Like what? Eleanor told him about Carmen and her teaching stories, about George and his military experiences, about Mr. Martinez and his 40 years fixing cars. They sound like interesting people, Marcus said, and Eleanor realized he was really listening. They are. And you know what else? They see me as Eleanor, the competent nurse, not as someone who's just killing time in retirement. Marcus stopped cutting and looked at her. Is that how I made you feel? Like you were just killing time? Sometimes, Eleanor admitted gently. Not intentionally, but yes. I'm sorry, Mom. I really didn't realize. The lunch Marcus prepared wasn't perfect. The chicken was slightly dry, and he had used too much salt in the sauce. But it was one of the best lunches Eleanor had had in years. Not because of the food, but because of the company. For the first time in a long time, her son was present, engaged, interested in her life. Can I ask you something? Marcus said while they washed dishes together. Of course. Are you happy? I mean, really happy? Eleanor considered the question while drying a plate. You know, Marcus, for the first time in 2 years, I wake up every morning with something to look forward to. I have people who count on me, work that means something, a purpose that's mine. So yes, I'm happy. Well, he said, smiling, then I'm happy too. The new arrangement brought changes Eleanor hadn't anticipated. Marcus began calling during the week, not to ask for favors, but just to talk. He asked about her patients, shared work stories, sometimes even asked for advice about personal situations. Mom, can I ask you about Jennifer? He said on a Thursday night. The girl you're getting to know? Yeah, she's going through a tough time. Her father is sick, and she's very stressed trying to take care of him and work at the same time. I don't know how to help. Eleanor smiled at the irony. Marcus, are you asking for advice about how to support someone who's caring for a sick relative? Oh, he paused. You think she could talk to you? I mean, you understand these things professionally. Of course she can. And Marcus? Yes? The fact that you care enough to ask for help shows you've become a much better man. At work, Eleanor was flourishing. Dr. Santos had increased her patient load to 4 days a week, and she was considering accepting occasional weekend cases. Not because she needed the money, but because she genuinely loved the work. Carmen had become more than a patient. She had become a friend. They shared stories about teaching, Carmen about history, Eleanor about training new nursing students. You know, Carmen said on a Wednesday, you should consider teaching. There's always a need for experienced instructors at nursing schools. I've thought about it, Eleanor admitted, but I'm not sure I'm ready to return to formal education. Who said anything about formal? There are community programs, first aid workshops, even informal mentoring for new nurses. You have so much knowledge to share. The idea planted a seed in Eleanor's mind. Maybe there were even more ways to use her experience, to find purpose, to contribute. George, meanwhile, had recovered completely, but asked for Eleanor to continue visiting once a week for routine checkups. She suspected it was more about companionship than medical care, but that also had value. You saved my life, he said on a Friday. George, you saved yourself. I just helped with the recovery. No, he said firmly. Not just physically. You reminded me that I'm still a person worth listening to. That's a form of salvation, too. Eleanor understood exactly what he meant. In the 5th week of her new job, Eleanor received an unexpected call. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Linda Santos, Dr. Santos's wife. My father-in-law is arriving from Cuba next week, and he's going to need specialized care. Dr. Santos told me you're exceptional with elderly patients. Would it be possible to consider a private case? It was an opportunity to expand even further, to perhaps eventually work independently. Eleanor felt that familiar acceleration of excitement that came with new possibilities. Can I know more details? Of course. And Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. Santos told me you've completely transformed the morale of our regular patients. Everyone specifically asks for you. That's rare. After hanging up, Eleanor sat in her kitchen, looking through the window at the garden she had tended with such love. The roses were still blooming, resilient and beautiful. There was something poetic about it, Both she and the flowers had found ways to flourish again, even in a different season of life. Her phone rang again. It was Marcus. "Hi, Mom. Just wanted to let you know I'll arrive a little earlier on Saturday. I thought I'd make French bread to go with lunch. Jennifer taught me the recipe." "That would be lovely, honey." "And Mom, thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me that growing up isn't optional, and for showing me what a strong person looks like when they really decide to stand up for what's important to them." Eleanor hung up the phone with a smile that lit up the entire house. She had found more than a job. She had found herself again. 3 months had passed since Eleanor had transformed her life, and she was settling comfortably into her new routine when she received a call that would change everything again. "Eleanor, I need a favor," Dr. Santos said, his voice carrying unusual urgency. "We have a delicate situation, a new patient, Mrs. Victoria Whitman, 68 years old, recovering from hip replacement. She's, let's say, a challenging personality." Eleanor had learned that challenging personality in medical vocabulary could mean anything from a bit stubborn to complete psychological torture. "What kind of challenge are we talking about?" "She's already dismissed 3 nurses in 2 weeks. Apparently, none of them were up to her standards. She's very specific about how things should be done, very critical about care methods, and has a tendency to, well, treat caregivers like domestic staff." Eleanor almost laughed. After 3 months caring for people who appreciated and respected her, a difficult patient sounded almost like a welcome challenge. "Dr. Santos, I spent 30 years dealing with ICU patients during their worst moments. I think I can handle a demanding lady." "I hoped you'd say that. But Eleanor, be warned, she specifically asked for a younger and more energetic nurse for the next attempt. When I said you're 62 years old, she hesitated." "Ah." Eleanor felt a familiar pang of frustration. "And what did you say?" "I said you're the best home care nurse I've ever worked with, and that if she wants quality care, she'll have to trust my professional judgment. Thank you for the confidence. When do I start?" "Monday, 9 a.m. And Eleanor, good luck." Monday morning, Eleanor prepared with extra care. Impeccable uniform, professionally styled hair, confident posture. If Mrs. Whitman wanted to judge based on appearances, Eleanor would make sure the first impression was one of absolute competence. Victoria Whitman's house was impressive. A colonial-style mansion in an exclusive neighborhood with manicured gardens and a circular driveway. Eleanor rang the doorbell at 9 a.m. sharp. The door was opened by a woman in her 40s, clearly stressed. "You must be the new nurse. I'm Patricia, Mrs. Whitman's daughter. Please tell me you're not going to quit on the first day." "I have no plans to quit," Eleanor said calmly. Patricia led her through an elegantly decorated living room to a first-floor bedroom where Victoria Whitman sat in a blue velvet chair, dressed impeccably despite recovering from surgery. She was an impressive woman. Perfectly styled silver hair, upright posture, blue eyes that missed very little. "You're the nurse?" Victoria asked, studying Eleanor from top to bottom. "You look older than I expected." "Mrs. Whitman, I'm Eleanor Mitchell. I'm 62 years old with 30 years of nursing experience. I'm here to help you with your recovery." The last nurse was 45 and still didn't know the difference between a painkiller and an anti-inflammatory. "Fortunately, I know the difference. May I see your current medications?" Victoria gestured to a side table covered with medication bottles. Eleanor examined them quickly, immediately noticing several potential problems. "Mrs. Whitman, who organized these medications for you?" "The previous nurse." "Why?" "Because 2 of these medications shouldn't be taken at the same time, and you're taking a painkiller at a dosage that's too high for your weight and age." Victoria was silent for a moment. "Are you sure?" "Completely. With your permission, I'd like to call Dr. Santos to confirm and adjust your prescription." "Do it." Eleanor made the call, explained the concerns, and received confirmation to adjust the medication regimen. When she hung up, Victoria was watching her with new attention. "You noticed that immediately?" "Yes, it's part of basic training for nurses with critical care experience. Drug interactions can be dangerous, especially in patients recovering from surgery." "Interesting. The previous nurse told me I was being difficult when I questioned the dosages." Eleanor understood. "Mrs. Whitman, questioning medications isn't being difficult. It's being smart. It's your body, your recovery. You have the right to understand and approve everything you're taking." For the first time, Victoria smiled. No one has told me that before. The next 2 hours were a revelation for both of them. Victoria wasn't difficult. She was intelligent, well-informed, and frustrated by being treated as incapable of understanding her own medical condition. The first nurse talked to me like I was a child, Victoria explained, while Eleanor helped her with physical therapy exercises. The second assumed I wouldn't understand medical explanations. The third treated me like I was too fragile to do anything myself. And you hated it, Eleanor said. I detested it. I worked as a hospital administrator for 35 years. I understand medical terminology, procedures, protocols. I want to be informed about my own recovery, not treated like a passive object of care. Eleanor stopped what she was doing and looked directly at Victoria. Mrs. Whitman, you just described exactly how I felt during the first 2 years of my retirement. How so? People assumed that because I was retired, I no longer had valid knowledge, important opinions, or the ability to make significant decisions. They saw me only as the retiree or the mom, not as Eleanor, an experienced professional with 3 decades of expertise. Victoria was quiet for a moment. And how did you change that? I went back to work. I refused to accept that my age or retirement status defined me. I found ways to use my experience and knowledge where they were valued. And now you're taking care of me. I am. And I can promise I'll never treat you as if you're less capable or intelligent than you are. I'll explain everything I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and I'll listen to your concerns and suggestions. Victoria smiled again, this time with genuine warmth. Eleanor, I think you and I are going to get along very well. When Eleanor left the Whitman house that afternoon, Patricia was waiting at the door. How was it? Was she difficult? She wasn't difficult at all, Eleanor said. She's intelligent, informed, and deserves to be treated with respect. The previous nurses probably failed to recognize that. Really? Because she's been, well, quite critical. Mrs. Patricia, your mother spent decades in a position of professional responsibility. She's used to having her opinions valued and her competence recognized. When people treat her as if she's incapable or ignorant just because she's recovering from surgery, of course she gets frustrated. Patricia sat down heavily. God, I messed up, didn't I? You didn't mess anything up, Eleanor said gently. You were trying to take care of her. But maybe it's time to ask how she wants to be cared for, instead of assuming you know what's best. The following week, Eleanor observed a subtle but significant transformation in the Whitman family dynamics. Patricia began including Victoria in discussions about her recovery. James, her son, called to talk to his mother about professional matters, asking for advice based on her administrative experience. You know what happened yesterday? Victoria said enthusiastically on a Wednesday. James asked me about budget management for a project at his work. It's been months since anyone asked my professional opinion about anything. And how did you feel? Like myself again. Like Victoria Whitman, who happens to have broken her hip, not like the patient who happened to once be Victoria Whitman. Eleanor smiled. Exactly. Eleanor, can I ask you something else? Always. When you finish taking care of me, which will be soon, since I'm recovering so well, would you consider working with me on a project? What kind of project? Victoria leaned forward, animated. I've been thinking about our conversation about dignity and respect in elderly care, and about how so many competent people are treated as incompetent just because of age or temporary condition. What if we created a training program for caregivers about maintaining patient dignity? Eleanor felt that familiar acceleration of interest. Go on. You have the medical experience. I have the administrative experience. Together, we could develop protocols, training materials, even workshops for nurses, family members, anyone involved in caring for the elderly. Victoria, that's an incredible idea. Would you do it with me? Eleanor thought for a moment. A few months ago, her life had been reduced to washing clothes on Saturdays. Now, she was being invited to co-create a program that could impact how society treats older people. Yes, she said without hesitation. I would do that with you. Victoria clapped her hands. Excellent. We can start sketching ideas next week. Eleanor drove home that afternoon with her head full of possibilities. Her life had transformed from a routine of unrecognized service to a journey of continuous professional growth and meaningful purpose. And it had all started with her simply saying no to the assumption that she had nothing important to do. 2 weeks of working with Victoria Whitman brought a surprising transformation. The difficult patient had become one of Eleanor's favorites, and vice versa. They had developed a routine that respected both Victoria's medical needs and her need to maintain control and dignity. "Eleanor," Victoria said on a Thursday while completing their physical therapy exercises, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why did you go back to work? You clearly don't need the money. Your competence suggests you had a successful career, and at 62, you could be enjoying a comfortable retirement." Eleanor considered the question. Over the weeks, she had shared professional stories with Victoria, but hadn't talked about her personal journey. "Do you really want to know?" "Very much." Eleanor told the whole story, the 3 years of Saturday laundry, Marcus's question that had awakened her consciousness, the feeling of invisibility that had grown gradually until it became unbearable. "So you didn't go back to work for money or boredom?" Victoria said thoughtfully. "You went back to recover your identity." "Exactly. And it worked. My patients see me as Eleanor, the competent nurse. My son finally learned to see me as a person with my own life and needs. I remember who I am beyond my relationships with other people." Victoria was quiet for a moment, and Eleanor noticed there were tears in her eyes. "Victoria, did I say something wrong?" "No, dear. You said everything right. It's just that, well, my situation isn't so different from yours." "How so?" Victoria sighed. "My children, Patricia and her brother James, are well-intentioned, but since I broke my hip, they started treating me like I was, well, like you described. No longer Victoria, the hospital administrator who managed multi-million-dollar budgets and supervised hundreds of employees. Just mommy who hurt her hip and needs to be taken care of." Eleanor understood immediately, and the previous nurses reinforced that dynamic. "Exactly. They talked over me with Patricia as if I wasn't there. They made decisions about my food, my schedule, my medications without consulting me. It was as if my professional experience had simply evaporated. And you reacted badly. Terribly badly. I was critical, demanding, difficult. But Eleanor, I was defending my competence, my dignity, my right to participate in decisions about my own recovery." Eleanor sat in the chair next to Victoria. "And you were right. Absolutely right." "Do you think so?" "Victoria, you spent decades in hospital administration. You understand medical protocols better than most people. The fact that you broke your hip didn't erase that knowledge. The people who treated you as incompetent were wrong, and you had every right to resist." Victoria began to cry softly. "Thank you for saying that. I was starting to doubt myself." "Never doubt yourself. You are a brilliant woman with decades of valuable experience. A temporary injury doesn't change that." That afternoon, when Patricia arrived for her daily visit, Eleanor decided to address the situation. "Patricia, can I talk to you about your mother?" "Of course. How has she been behaving? Has she been cooperative?" "She's been an ideal patient. Intelligent, informed, engaged in her own recovery. But I need to ask you, do you notice how you talk about her?" Patricia looked confused. "How so?" "You asked how she's been behaving, as if she were a child. You use words like cooperative, as if she were a problem to be managed instead of a competent adult recovering from surgery." I didn't realize I was doing that." Your mother spent 35 years in hospital administration. She probably understands her medical condition better than you or I do. When you treat her as incapable of participating in decisions about her own recovery, you're disrespecting decades of professional expertise." Patricia sat down heavily. "The other nurses said she was being difficult. The other nurses were treating her condescendingly. She was defending her dignity and competence. There's a difference." "God, I screwed everything up, didn't I?" "You didn't screw anything up," Eleanor said gently. "You were trying to take care of her. But maybe it's time to ask how she wants to be cared for, instead of assuming you know what's best." The following week, Eleanor observed a subtle but significant transformation in the Whitman family dynamics. Patricia began including Victoria in discussions about her recovery. James, her son, called to talk to his mother about professional matters, asking for advice based on her administrative experience. "You know what happened yesterday?" Victoria said with enthusiasm on a Wednesday. James asked me about budget management for a project at his work. It's been months since anyone asked my professional opinion about anything. And how did you feel? Like myself again. Like Victoria Whitman, who happens to have broken her hip, not like the patient who happened to once be Victoria Whitman. Eleanor smiled. Exactly. Eleanor, can I ask you something else? Always. When you finish taking care of me, which will be soon since I'm recovering so well, would you consider working with me on a project? What kind of project? Victoria leaned forward, animated. I've been thinking about our conversation about dignity and respect in elderly care, and about how so many competent people are treated as incompetent just because of age or temporary condition. What if we created a training program for caregivers about maintaining patient dignity? Eleanor felt that familiar acceleration of interest. Go on. You have the medical experience. I have the administrative experience. Together, we could develop protocols, training materials, even workshops for nurses, family members, anyone involved in caring for the elderly. Victoria, that's an incredible idea. Would you do it with me? Eleanor thought for a moment. A few months ago, her life had been reduced to washing clothes on Saturdays. Now, she was being invited to co-create a program that could impact how society treats older people. Yes, she said without hesitation. I would do that with you. Victoria clapped her hands. Excellent. We can start sketching ideas next week. Eleanor drove home that afternoon with her head full of possibilities. Her life had transformed from a routine of unrecognized service to a journey of continuous professional growth and meaningful purpose. And it had all started with her simply saying no to the assumption that she had nothing important to do. 6 months had passed since Eleanor had transformed her life, and the change was so profound that sometimes she barely recognized the woman she had been. It was a Friday in spring, and Eleanor was in her kitchen preparing lunch for a special meeting. Victoria would arrive in an hour to discuss the final details of their Dignity in Care training program, which was about to be launched in partnership with 3 local hospitals. Carmen would come shortly after for a social visit. She had recovered completely, but their weekly tea and conversation sessions had become a precious tradition. And George would make his monthly medical checkup, which both knew was more about companionship and stories than any medical necessity. The phone rang while Eleanor was checking the sauce that was cooking. Hello, Eleanor. This is Dr. Santos. I have an interesting proposal for you. I'm listening. The regional hospital contacted me. They want to implement a pilot program for post-hospital home care, and they asked if I knew any nurse with experience to lead the project. Naturally, I thought of you. Eleanor felt that familiar acceleration of excitement. Tell me more. It would be a supervisory position, training other nurses, developing protocols, managing complex cases. Basically, they want someone to create a program from scratch. Interested? Eleanor looked through the kitchen window at her garden, where the roses were blooming magnificently in spring. There was something poetic about the timing. New season, new opportunities, new life flourishing. Dr. Santos, can I give you an answer on Monday? I have some things to consider. Of course. But Eleanor, they want someone with your experience and reputation. You've become something of a legend in the home care community. After hanging up, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, reflecting on how her life had changed. 6 months ago, she was waiting for Marcus to arrive with his bags of dirty laundry, feeling invisible and purposeless. Now, she had multiple professional opportunities, a growing circle of friends and colleagues who valued her expertise, and most importantly, a clear understanding of her own worth. The doorbell rang. Victoria was at the door, wearing an impeccable suit and carrying a leather briefcase, every appearance of an executive in her element. Eleanor, dear, I'm so excited for our meeting. I have the latest revisions of the curriculum. They sat in the living room, spreading documents over the coffee table. The Dignity in Care program had grown beyond both their initial expectations. What had started as a casual idea had become a comprehensive curriculum covering respectful communication, maintaining patient autonomy, recognizing continued competence in the elderly, and protocols for including patients in decisions about their own care. St. Mary's Hospital wants to implement the program in all departments, Victoria said, barely able to contain her excitement. And we have interest from 2 nursing homes as well. It's incredible how this has grown, Eleanor said, leafing through pages that represented months of collaborative work. You know what's most incredible? We both found purpose again doing something we never could have imagined 6 months ago. The doorbell rang again. Carmen was at the door, with a radiant smile and a covered bowl. "I brought arroz con pollo," she announced, "and some updates about my own revolution." Carmen had been inspired by Eleanor's journey and had started teaching Spanish classes for adults at a community center. "I discovered that teaching doesn't stop when you officially retire," she said, sitting with them in the living room. "I still have a lot of knowledge to share." George arrived shortly after, walking with renewed confidence and carrying a small suitcase. "Where are you going?" Eleanor asked. "Visiting my grandson in Denver. First trip I've taken alone in 5 years." He smiled. "Something about you women recovering your independence inspired me to recover mine, too." Eleanor looked around the room. Victoria discussing implementation strategies with sharp professionalism, Carmen telling animated stories about her new students, George planning travel adventures. All of them, somehow, had found ways to redefine what it meant to age with purpose. "You know," Eleanor said, 6 months ago, my son asked me what I had to do all day. It was a cruel question at the time, but it was also an awakening." "And now?" Victoria asked. "Now I have so many things to do that I need a calendar to keep track of everything." Later that afternoon, after her guests had left, Eleanor was organizing the program materials when her phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hi, Mom. Can I come over? I have something to show you." "Of course, honey. But I need to warn you that I have a work call at 7. "A work call on Friday night? You're becoming a workaholic," he said, and she could hear the pride in his voice. Marcus arrived an hour later with Jennifer, whom Eleanor had met a few times and genuinely liked. "Mom, we have an announcement," Marcus said, looking slightly nervous. "Are you getting married?" Eleanor asked. "Not yet," Jennifer laughed, "but we've decided to move in together, and Marcus has something to ask you." Marcus took a deep breath. "Mom, would you mind if I brought some of my things back here, temporarily, just while we look for a bigger apartment together?" Eleanor was silent for a moment, and Marcus continued quickly. "But it would be different this time. I would do my own laundry, cook my own meals, not assume you're available to take care of me. It would be more like roommates, and only for a few months." Eleanor considered the proposal. The woman she had been 6 months ago would have said yes immediately, happy to have her son nearby again. But the Eleanor of now had other considerations. "Marcus, I would love to have you here temporarily, but you need to understand. My life now is very active. I have work commitments, evening meetings, sometimes work trips. I can't adjust my schedule to your needs." "Mom," Marcus said seriously, "I wouldn't expect you to do that. Your work, your projects, your life, all of that is important. I would adjust to your schedule, not the other way around." Jennifer added, "And I would love to help with household tasks. It would be a pleasure to contribute instead of just taking up space." Eleanor smiled. "In that case, you're both welcome." Marcus hugged her. "Thank you, Mom. And can I say something?" "Of course. I'm proud of you. Of the work you're doing, of how you stood up for your independence, of how you became this incredible person you always were, but I was too young and too foolish to recognize." Eleanor felt tears of happiness. "Thank you, honey. That means everything to me." That night, after Marcus and Jennifer left, Eleanor sat on her porch with a cup of tea, reflecting on the journey she had taken. 6 months ago, she had been Eleanor the laundry service, Eleanor with nothing important to do, Eleanor who existed primarily to make others' lives easier. Now she was Eleanor the respected nurse, Eleanor the program developer, Eleanor the mentor, Eleanor who had her own agenda and priorities. Marcus's question, "What else do you have to do all day?" had been the catalyst for the greatest transformation of her adult life. And the answer now? Eleanor had so many important things to do that they barely fit into her days. She opened her phone and sent a message to Dr. Santos. "Yes, I'm interested in the hospital position. Let's talk Monday about details." Eleanor Mitchell, at 62 years old, was just beginning. 6 months later, Eleanor woke on a Saturday morning with the deep satisfaction of someone who had found their place in the world. No longer the laundry Saturday that had defined 3 years of her life, but a Saturday full of possibilities and choices. Her new position as director of home care at the regional hospital had proven even more rewarding than she had imagined. She supervised a team of 12 nurses, developed protocols that were being adopted by other hospitals, and most importantly, ensured that patients like Victoria received care that respected their dignity and competence. The Dignity in Care program she and Victoria had created was being implemented in 18 institutions and had generated interest from organizations in other states. Eleanor had become a regular speaker at nursing conferences, sharing her expertise on maintaining autonomy in elderly care. Marcus and Jennifer had found a lovely apartment and moved out 2 months ago, but now they had a different Saturday ritual. They came for lunch, but took turns cooking, and conversations revolved equally around all 3 of their lives. Marcus asked about Eleanor's work projects with genuine interest, and she felt seen and valued as the competent professional she had always been. Carmen had become one of Eleanor's best friends, and they met regularly to share stories about their students, Carmen with her Spanish students, Eleanor with her nurses in training. George sent postcards from his travels, each with a note about how the confidence he had recovered through Eleanor's respectful care had changed his perspective on aging. Victoria and Eleanor had become business partners as well as close friends. They were writing a book about dignity in elderly care and planning to expand their training program nationally. That particular Saturday morning, Eleanor was preparing for something special. The hospital was organizing a ceremony to recognize her work in developing the home care program, and Marcus, Jennifer, Victoria, Carmen, George, and several colleagues would be present. While getting ready, Eleanor thought about the journey she had taken since that painful morning when Marcus had asked what she had to do all day. The question had been an awakening, but it had also been a gift, because it had forced Eleanor to examine her life and recognize that she had become invisible to herself. Now, at 63 years old, Eleanor knew exactly who she was and what she had to offer the world. She was a specialized nurse, a leader in elderly care, a mentor to younger nurses, a visionary business partner, a loyal friend, and yes, still a mother, but a mother who was also a complete person with her own rich and meaningful life. The phone rang. It was Marcus. "Mom, are you ready for your big day?" "I am," Eleanor said, and realized it was completely true. "I'm so proud of you, of what you've built, of how you transform not just your own life, but the lives of so many other people." "Thank you, honey. I'll see you at the ceremony." "Mom?" "Yes?" "Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to grow up." Eleanor hung up the phone with a smile. She had started this journey trying to find an answer to Marcus's question about what she had to do. In the end, she had discovered something much more important. She had found herself. And this Eleanor, competent, valued, respected, and completely present in her own life, had much, much to do.